Welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm Sharaad Kuttan. With me, Dietrich Jung. He's professor at the Center for Contemporary Middle East Studies at the University of Southern Denmark. His current project is something titled the Modern Subjectivities Project. Dietrich, help us understand, what does it mean to talk about modern subjectivities?
You know, the origin of this project is my interest in sociology. And in the way in the 20th century people, and I use the term, had to construct themselves, that we call identity building. When you look at the sociological literature, I would say 90% is dealing with Western Europe and the United States. And there are developed sociological concepts, you can say ideal types of what makes a modern subject. But they are not made in reference to other parts of the world. And because of having been living in many different Islamic countries or Muslim countries, I could see these types amongst Muslims as well. So my interest was to see how more widespread global types of identity or of identification are linked to Islamic traditions, how Muslims have been engaged in doing that. And that was the origin of the study, and dissatisfaction with concepts that are basically loaned by European history and not really reflect upon histories of other people.
Right, so not necessarily grounded in those particular contexts. I do want to ask you, just to get some conceptual clarity, what is not modern then? I mean, if there's modern subjects and subjectivities, what is pre-modern, non-modern? How would you describe that?
With respect to this project and the term of a subject, the non-modern is not a subject, in the sense of that it is you who have to build up, to construct yourself. And that's a particularly modern thing to do. You are born into the world as what you are in pre-modern times. In modern times, you are continuously working on yourself. Right, and that's a difficult concept to grapple with, because I think a lot of us assume that intuitively we are born into cultures, that we are Indian, at least in the Malaysian context, Indian, Malay, Chinese, or whatever subdivisions of that may be, that it's not a thought-out process, it's not something that we consciously do. But you're saying that actually the modern subject does that. And maybe to illustrate, how do they do that? Now, one point is, I'm speaking as an observer. And observers very often analyze and identify things actors themselves do unconsciously. This is in particular something in psychology, sociology, academics do. So therefore it's not very surprising and not an argument against this self-formation that you are not doing it consciously. But you say you have a Malayan background as culture. You might be raised as a Muslim, but you're also a clerk for the state administration, and you had an education at higher education institutes. You are a father. You are the father of a soccer-playing boy. So there are different subject positions which you permanently have to negotiate. And that is your daily task in modern life. And this actually never ends. It is a continuous process. Now, a lot of talk, and I think it comes from leaders, that suggest that our identities are pretty much fixed, and they don't have the fluidity that you suggest, so they don't have the dynamics of a constant building or repairing or shoring up or maybe even changing. What specific identities or groups of people, demographic groups, were you looking at in terms of looking at this issue of subjectivities? Now, what we can in very broad terms say is that throughout the 20th century you have a change in terms of identification with the collective, rather moving to a kind of more individualized self-making process. If you think, and we have, for example, also worked with the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, founded in 1928.
The Global Ikhwan? Ikhwan Muslimin?
Yeah, Ikhwan al-Muslimin. And there you can see certainly, founded in the 1920s, they had a very strong peer group-oriented collectivist identity orientation. This does not anymore fit, and also in many Muslim settings today. So in this sense, you have a shift of specific types you are oriented toward when you construct yourself. And these have their conjunctures over history. So in this sense, you can detect relevant and globally visible forms of the subject, but it's always tied to local traditions and everyday experiences.
What about the question of a global culture? And I think it's specifically of, looking in the Malaysian context, of young people. I always think of young people. This is where I would concede that, you know, it is very fluid, that young people seem to be so responsive to all kinds of inputs, not just local but global, things that they watch on television, on Netflix. Consumer lifestyle seems to be shaping their identities. Is that something that the Muslim world, as you observe it, is also grappling with, this idea of the globalized subject who's, you know, constantly consuming things?
Definitely. Otherwise, Muslims would not be a part of the global life, and they are indeed. So the question in itself, I think, makes no sense. We have to. What is important is to see that we do not have culture in terms of containers. What we do have are very different levels of culture, and even if you do not think that you are linked to something like global templates of culture, you are in your everyday life. And as you rightly say, with technological advancement, this individual identity construction more and more rely on almost accidental access to specific kind of media and specific. You get today teachers, whether in religion, in culture, whether in politics or in medicine, via Google.
Right. I want to ask you, so when you're looking at these, do you have to frame it in national terms? Are you looking, say, for instance, as women of Lebanon or the young people of Tunisia? I mean, is this how it operates when you need to be, when you do your observational work?
I think we should not disregard the national context. And the national context plays a role in particular when you have, if we take this example of the so-called Arab Spring, the rebellion 2011, 2012, there one concern certainly was to change national governments. So you cannot avoid to act and to view politics within the context of the national state. However, you do that possibly in relating to more general global values and norms like human rights, like labor rights, where you get ideas from more developed welfare states. So it's a permanent juggling with levels and negotiating with your aims what you are targeting. But we should not underestimate that the national government and the confines of the national state are quite imperative in terms of political action.
Very quickly, what are the countries in the Middle East that you observe more closely, that you comment on?
Well, I have been, I started my career with looking closer to Egypt, Lebanon, and later I studied Arabic in Syria. Then I had the guest professorship in Turkey, and I turned into a Turkey expert. So in the past decade, I worked more on Turkey than on Arab countries.
Okay, we'll return in a short while. Stay tuned.